Hey everybody, welcome to another exciting episode of Coco and Dalts. I'm not Dalts.
And I'm not Coco. I was building suspense there because maybe people at home were like, what's he going to say? I don't know what he's going to say. He's so unpredictable.
And today we're talking about a new Netflix miniseries, although it didn't feel like a miniseries, called...
What's the opposite of a miniseries? Is it a maxi-series, I guess?
Yeah. Called The Disappearance of Madeline McCann. If you are listening to this in real time, it's April of 2019. It was released in March of 2019.
Which is expedient for us to get to this.
Right. Well, it took a long time for us to get through all the episodes. It's an 8-episode series, and if you are unfamiliar with the case, like Dalts was before we began watching this series...
So you mercilessly mocked me.
I did not. I said no such thing.
You said, where have you been? Off air, you were like throwing things around. And you said, have you been under a rock all these years? What do you mean you haven't heard of Madeline McCann?
It was like a haymaker to the baby maker. Like I was so upset that you hadn't heard of this case.
I had never seen you so angry. The fury was unbridled.
I mean, I think you are the only person in the world who never heard of this kid.
There it is. There's a tip of the anger iceberg right there.
Well, that's because this case was pretty inescapable for at least the first few weeks after she went missing.
So this was when?
It was
2007.
2007, which I was surprised by because when you told me you hadn't heard of this kid and I was kind of describing the case to you, I was like, yeah, I think she went missing around the same time that like Princess Di died and JFK Jr. died. So, it was about 10 years ago. And you're like, what are you talking about? That was like 20 years ago. And I was like, what do you mean the 90s were 20 years ago? So my timeline was way off. So yes, it was 2007 when she went missing. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the case, she was a 3-year-old British girl. She was on holiday with her parents and her twin younger siblings in Portugal when she vanished without a trace one night. Nothing has been found of her in the 12 years since she went missing.
Spoiler.
The disappearance of Madeline McCann. So
it's not the disappearance and reappearance.
Right,
or the
exactly.
discovery of...
Right. So this series is, like I said, an 8-parter, and it delves into what happened the night she went missing, who the suspects were, a lot of the leads that have been found and followed up on or not followed up on since then, what she would look like today. The search is still ongoing, but now it's being done by the British government, by Scotland Yard, instead of really by the Portuguese police, who, spoiler alert, maybe bungled the investigation a little bit in the beginning.
Maybe. Just a tad.
So what's
Portuguese for incompetent?
Incompetente.
Really?
I have no idea.
Look at that.
I don't know.
I had no idea you were so multi-talented.
Yeah, well, it is a Romance language, and I took 4 years of Latin in high school, so I'm,
Portuguese is one of those hard Romance languages. Though.
Yeah, it doesn't, when they subtitled the Portuguese people who didn't speak English, obviously, and I didn't really recognize any of it except when they would say like blah 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 Madeline McCann,
right.
Blah blah blah, like it's not like Spanish or Italian where you can pick some words out, or French. Like it was just Greek to me.
When they do that, this is kind of a tangent, but whenever they do that in movies and somebody's English name comes on there, I always think it would be so much nicer if they did it in their native language, like Italian, Bob Smith. Italian. Wouldn't it be better if it was like Roberto Smithanzio or something like that? Like translate the name too, not just like, foreign language, insert Anglo name here.
I can't wait to go to Italy with you.
I think it'll be great. I'll introduce myself as Daltso. Daltino,
there we go.
So back to...
Yeah. So what did you think of not knowing anything about the case?
You're just reinforcing my ignorance.
No,
there.
I'm just saying...
Another shot.
No, it's not. It really was like I didn't follow the case closely at all. It was just so pervasive that like every time I watched the news, they talked about it. So...
But I didn't watch the news, I guess.
Yeah, so...
I wasn't watching that news.
Yeah.
I wasn't watching Entertainment Tonight or whatever. Where was this on?
I don't know. It was probably on, like, ABC. I was in... No, I wasn't in college because this wasn't the 90s. So, I don't know. I was probably watching...
You're having, like, a bit of a time warp factor there going on.
I really think the 90s were 10 years ago.
I think that this story really affected you, and that's what's happened, is sort of traumatized you a little bit.
So, what did you think of the miniseries?
So, the miniseries, as I stated off the top, was not very short. It was 8 episodes in the neighborhood of an hour, 52 minutes, 58 minutes, an hour and 2, something like that. And to me, this series, so the baseline story is fascinating. As I'm the perfect person to watch this because I had no knowledge of it whatsoever. Right. So I was going into this completely ignorant, and you strong-armed me into watching it as you usually do. You're usually very forceful with these things and bossing me around and giving me wedgies and stuff like that.
I cuffed him to the couch and I put toothpicks in his eyelids.
Right,
I was
you
like,
did.
You will watch this.
You must watch this fascinating documentary. So I was going into it thinking, this will be good. I'll learn some stuff. I learned some stuff. It just took me way too long to get to it. Like after every episode, it seemed like the best parts of each episode were the last 5 to 8 minutes, and they would reveal something that they were building up to in the entire time. There was way too much drone footage of the village at night. And it was the same drone footage, so they took, let's say, 45 minutes of drone footage of the beautiful, beautiful coastal Portuguese town, resort town that this event occurred in. Beautiful scenery, beautiful drone footage, but we saw it over and over again. So this very easily, to me, 8 episodes could have been 4, and it would have been 4 really good episodes. It would have been on the same plane, I think, as the O.J. Simpson stuff that we watched.
Right.
Like when every episode was packed with suspenseful stuff, and you needed to get to the next one. Like I didn't really want to binge watch this.
That's why it took us a month.
That's why it took us
a month
to
watch 8 episodes.
Because we're like, okay, it's going to drag through the first 40 minutes. We're going to talk about stuff that maybe we've talked about before. Right. We're going to revisit the neighbor being accused, and then he's going to say it was the most horrible experience of my life. And then we're going to see that same thing 2 episodes later.
Right. It could have been 4 episodes in the neighborhood of 60 to 75 minutes, and the first one could have been, this is what happened like the night she disappeared.
Right.
And then the next one could have been, this is why the parents were suspects.
Right.
The next one could have been, this is the neighbor guy,
yeah.
and like all the other
there was
sightings
no clear
that
delineation.
Night. And then the final one could have been, well, this is why the media sucks, and really sensationalized
I thought that was a tangent to me. That to me was almost like, it was almost superfluous because it was implied throughout the entire coverage, throughout all the other 7 episodes.
Right.
So essentially what they did was a compilation of all the bad media behavior in the first 7 episodes and put it in the last one and indicted the media. And I'm in the media and I have journalism background, but I can say that this stuff was reprehensible. Some of the things that they were, I mean, that's the British press. It's just the tabloid press. That's the way it goes. It doesn't excuse it, but that was just a nasty kind of way. So these poor parents were going through all this stuff, high visibility, being accused of doing these nasty things. And one of the things that you asked me about, or we talked about, is as a parent. So what happens was, I don't know how much detail we got into how they disappeared, but the parents were all around a dining room table in a restaurant, and their kids of very young age were all in various parts of the resort, and they were sleeping. And there were no adults present where all these kids were sleeping. So what they would do is the adults would take turns going into and checking in on the room in the rooms where the kids were, and it was every 20 minutes. And as a parent, I can say that I've done something similar to that, where not necessarily in a foreign country and that sort of thing, but along those same lines, because sometimes you just don't have a choice. Somebody's got to go to the bathroom and you can't go in with them, so they're in there for 15 nerve-wracking minutes by themselves, and you're standing outside, especially if you have
boy
kids.
Parts.
If your kids are different gender than you are. So a parent can understand. I think some non-parents, perhaps yourself, would look at it and say, what are they doing? They're sitting there drinking and eating and having fun, and their kids are asleep, and they've abandoned their kids. What's going on?
Well, I think there's a difference between waiting outside like a public bathroom that has one entrance and exit, waiting for your kid to come out, versus being at a restaurant drinking with friends 500 yards.
Not being able to see the doors.
Not being able to see the doors or all the windows, and perhaps having given your children something to encourage
sleeping.
But
that was never
definitively
landed upon.
Here's one of the things that was kind of confusing, I guess, to me about the miniseries was there were a lot of reports at the time that suggested that because Madeline's parents are both doctors, they had given their kids something to encourage them to sleep.
To stay asleep, yeah.
To stay asleep so that
they could have fun.
So that they could have fun and, the kids could not get into any trouble in the apartment by themselves while the parents are away. And I think it was about the third episode where they started to kind of hone in on the parents as suspects.
Yep.
And they touched on that, but then there were a lot of things that touched on the parents being suspects, but then the miniseries just kind of glossed over them.
Yeah.
Like they were like, oh, well, the twin 2-year-olds didn't wake up when all this commotion was going on. People running in and out of the apartment, like screaming, crying, cops coming in, and the 2-year-olds never woke up. And what's up with that? But then they just dropped it. Like they never. Yeah. And then the thing with like the cadaver dogs too, like hitting on scents, like they kind of like waved it away. Like, oh, well, that's only meant to be a guide. That's not meant to be definitive. Well, I understand that, but cadaver dogs still hit on scent. So, so this is a really long-winded way of me saying, I think there's a difference between you standing outside a women's room waiting for your kid to come back out because you can't go in versus being at a restaurant a few hundred yards away, even if you're allegedly going back to your place every 20, 30 minutes and checking on your kids and possibly encouraging them to sleep soundly.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that you being the spoiler queen that you are, you told me that before.
Because
you said,
I didn't realize
you didn't hear
know.
this story about the doctor parents who drugged their kids and they were disappearing. And it's like, what? And then that was very much downplayed in this miniseries,
it really was.
Or documentary. It was, I thought it would have been a more sensational thing because that to me, when you told me that, it was like, whoa, this is like abducted in plain sight. Like this strange, the kid gets kidnapped, but then the parents are complicit in some way if they're drugging their kids. Like there's another level of this story that I thought was interesting, and they did kind of downplay that. And then the the cadaver dogs, when they brought them in, they dedicated a lot of time to that particular episode to the cadaver dogs chasing scents, and the dogs don't know any better. They're completely objective in this,
right? Uh-huh.
So they're pointing things out that they think are obvious, and there was some interesting points of evidence that the dogs brought up when they barked at certain spots when they're supposed to and everything like that. But then it went away. And then after that, we didn't really revisit the cadaver dogs.
Right, except for the cadaver dog handler a few episodes later saying like, well, it's never meant to be definitive. I'm like, well...
Then why did you use it?
And then also, are you really trying to explain away that they hit on something? Like in this apartment where this child went missing that everybody in the world knows about? Like, I don't know. I did think about this. I'm like, I don't know if So the little girl's parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, they refused to participate in this series, but clearly it was done with like McCann family authorization because a lot of their friends and family were interviewed.
Spokespeople and lawyers. And
and I don't know if the okay was only given after there were assurances made that we will downplay any mention that you might have had something to do with this.
Right.
I mean, it had to be mentioned because it was a huge deal.
It was part of the plot.
In the media when they were named suspects and when they were interrogated and stuff. And apparently they have still not been cleared by the Portuguese police. Well,
they've been taken off, according to the documentary anyway, they're taken off that official suspect list thing.
But that doesn't mean that they were...
But that doesn't mean they were innocent.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, and I think that this is about a lot of things as creative works such as these, as it happens with these, it's about a lot more than just the story that is advertised in the title. I mean, it's about more than just the disappearance of Madeline McCann. In other words, it's about parent responsibility. Mm-hmm. It's about police competence versus incompetence.
Right.
It's about sensationalism in the media.
Uh-huh.
It's about all sorts of different things. There's many layers to this story. I just think it would have been a multi-layer delicious cake if it had been in 4 instead of stretched out into a thin layer of dough over 8. How'd you like that analogy?
Now I'm hungry. Now I want cake. And it's we're recording this on Easter Sunday and nothing is open, so I can't.
I'll bake you a cake.
Are you telling me that I got something in my nose?
No, I'm just doing that because I thought I had something in my nose.
Oh, okay. I was like, what are you? Sorry, listeners.
It's probably not something they need to hear.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it's Easter Sunday, so I can't go out and buy a cake or cake fixins. So.
What else did you think of the whole Madeline McCann documentary?
So, like I said, the British government is now leading the investigation into her disappearance because the Portuguese police did bungle it pretty spectacularly off the top.
Yep.
I believe I read somewhere in the neighborhood of like 11 or 15 million pounds have been spent. And I'm like, wow, I mean, that's a whole lot of money during a time of austerity measures and Brexit. And I think that could have been something they could have touched on too, perhaps, was look at all the money. And I'm not saying that she's not worth it. I'm not saying that like it's not worth it to find this kid, but I think if they're gonna discuss like the media sensationalism and stuff, like this is another aspect you can bring up in a time of Brexit and economic uncertainty is tens of millions of pounds have been spent trying to find this one person, and all these leads, and
you could never spend enough money if it's
your own child.
Yeah.
And I thought that was speaking of the investigation, that was another thing that they attracted a lot of really bad investigators.
Right.
Like when they tried to hire private investigators, first they hired like a Spanish private investigation firm, and there was one guy who was on the case who got interviewed a lot, and I thought he was
legit.
Yeah, he was really legit.
Yeah.
Like you could tell he was really haunted by it.
He was tortured by what he had seen because he had to go into
like child porn rooms.
Try to find her.
Yeah, but the head of that investigation firm, like he was what did he do? He like talked to the media or something?
Yeah, he was more into it about himself and the image that he was trying to portray, and also trying to drum up business for his firm. Right.
And then they hired like an American firm that apparently was very, very highly recommended and claimed it had like former CIA operatives on it, and they could get, it was so funny, he was saying like he had contacts in the CIA and he could get satellite images of the town from like the very moment she was taken. And then when he gave them these pictures, they were from like Google Earth.
Right.
Like he was
a scammer.
Yeah, he was a total scam artist. And I'm like, they've
had some bad luck.
They've managed to hire very bad people.
So that's at the root of this too, is that with any disappearance of a child, the first few hours are crucial.
Right.
So you gotta blanket the area. You've gotta get as much of a response as possible. So apparently there was a delay in reporting the disappearance, and then there was a delay in reacting to the disappearance.
Right.
And the first time anybody really reacted to it was like 3 hours or something like that later.
Yeah.
It was a significant amount of time, which is, in a place, in a coastal town.
Right.
The kid could have been anywhere. Could have been on a boat gone to Spain or something like that.
Right. And especially like you're not in the States. You're not on like a huge landmass. Like, I mean, the kid could be in a different country.
Right.
Any minute.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't take long to go across borders when you're in Europe, obviously.
Right.
And so there was that aspect of it. And the part that hit home to me, which was, I think, in either the second last or the last episode, was when they got Scotland Yard involved in a heavier way, and they started doing Operation Grange, which was 2011. So Madeline disappears in 2007, and this big time operation kicks into gear in 2011, 4 years later.
Right.
So that's and this is when they really seem to have a professional person involved, somebody who knew some things. They were trying to canvass for more eyewitnesses and things like that. This is the stuff. If they'd have done that even 3.5 years earlier, then that would have been so much more helpful than waiting for so the Portuguese police didn't know what they were doing. Right. They were sort of downplaying it. There was apparently a known sex offender in the area, which was not found out until years later.
Right.
And had been lingering around the hotel. And there was all these things that we didn't learn about until later on. And actually later on in the grand scheme of the investigation, but also later on in the documentary. So there's a lot of these kinds of nuggets that kept popping up. It's like, well, wait a minute, why are we not listening? Why are we finding this out in the last minute of this episode?
Right. Yeah, and then they spent a lot of time talking about the neighbor who was a British expat who volunteered to translate, and then his life got turned upside down.
Yep.
But then they kept coming back to him, and
yeah, I don't think they really needed to come back to him because he kept saying the same sort of thing over and over again. I think part of this, to me, is so we're seeing this. We're definitely in peak TV right now. We're definitely in peak, like everything you want to watch is out there, and new series are coming out every week, and it's hard for us to keep up on them, and hard for a lot of people to keep up on them. But I think this is evidence that it's also in some ways the death of editing, because we're seeing this series could have been so much better if it had been shorter.
Right.
There's a lot of great material here. They had access to a lot of the key people. Interviews were done well. There was some journalism involved, investigation done that was good. But I think what we're doing now is that we've got it's almost like a factory churn. There's no seasons anymore, right? There's not like the fall TV season where you'd have a bunch of things come out and then that would be it, more or less, over the course of the year until some new things came in here and there into the spring. I think now it's just you're seeing this huge demand for content. You got to feed the beast. You got to get it out there. And it's like, okay, 8 episodes. Let's churn it out. Let's go.
And streaming services, if you're looking for more content, please drop us a line at cocoanddalts@gmail.com. We'll be more than happy to talk with you.
Well, we're open to, Spotify or Netflix is going to do some podcasts.
Right, totally.
We're totally there.
But
content is king. Or queen, as the case may be.
Yeah, definitely. I think it could have been 4 or 5 episodes in the 60 to 75 minute range. Like do one deep dive per episode on a subject, like the parents, like the investigation since 2011, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I think that would have been much tighter, much more interesting. And
also, dear producers, directors, content creators, this is to you. Not everything has to be an hour long. Not everything has to be a certain amount of time long. Like if you have one episode that is worth an hour and 20 and then the next one is worth 45, I think that's fine.
Yeah, totally.
I think the parameters are out the window. You don't have to allow for, a half an hour episode doesn't have to be 22 minutes and an hour episode doesn't have to be 48 or whatever it happens to be, or 46, to allow for commercials and station breaks and all that sort of stuff. Just give it what it's worth. This is the freeing aspect of streaming services. It doesn't have to be any sort of limit. So, this a lot of these felt like they were padded. A lot of these episodes felt like they needed to get to 50 or 55 or that's close enough to an hour. We don't, as a viewer, I don't care about that.
Right. I did like that. Like I said, I kind of stopped really paying attention to it after the first few weeks of the case. Like, I didn't seek out stuff when the case was going on, but
you couldn't avoid it, though, in some ways.
Yeah, like, you really couldn't avoid it. So it was interesting for me to see all the stuff that had happened after the first few weeks.
Right.
Like, I didn't, like, you would hear, like, oh, they've hired a private investigation firm, but then you never kind of found out what happened with that.
Right.
Like, I didn't know they hired the CIA operatives that were not actually CIA operatives.
They were scammers.
Yeah, so that was really interesting for me. And it was like, because there was so much news in the first few days of the case that it was hard to, you couldn't keep up with everything that was going on if you were following it. So it was interesting for me to see some of that stuff too. But yeah, I mean, I could have easily done with a lot less. Like, who cares?
So where do we stand in recommending or not recommending the disappearance of Madeline McCann?
I'd give it a B-, maybe in the C range.
Is that a recommendation?
I mean, sure. If you got 8 hours and you got nothing else to do, like, sure.
I also think this is one of those series where you read about sometimes that you could skip an episode every now and then.
Yeah.
Which seems contrary to, as somebody who appreciates art, you don't really want to skip anything, but this seems like it's one of those things where actually you could pick it up, every other episode or something like that if you felt the need.
Yeah,
or you could just skip right ahead to the end. Like if you're one of those, read the last page of or last chapter of a book.
But the last episode was just an indictment on the media and how sensationalized it was. So you're not even really going to find out anything about the rest of the case.
But to me, they reviewed all the media crimes from the entire coverage, right?
Yeah,
so
they
were dropping in on everything that was said at various points about the case in the British media.
It was pretty ridiculous, like that answer the editor of The Sun gave when he parsed what, like, I'm going to chuck it in this bin meant or whatever.
Right.
And it was just like total word salad. And I was like, what the hell does that even mean?
Right.
Like, I don't even think that guy spoke English.
Right.
Like, just.
Well, and that was an interesting part of it when the media got called on the in the investigation, in the British investigation on all this as to what crimes were committed by the media. Mm-hmm. And that's a nebulous thing because, free speech and all that sort of stuff. And you're right. The editors, the 2 editors who were called up there were were definitely spinning. Like, it was funny seeing them in those chairs because it's usually politicians or criminals or somebody in those chairs spinning words around, and it was actually the editors in this case saying, "Oh no, we not answering the question that was asked," kind of thing. So that was an interesting part. So I'm going to say pass on this one. I think if you're looking at watching all 8 episodes, I think that's not really there. And
there were 2 authors. They wrote a book together, an American lady and then like I think an Irish guy, and they were interviewed pretty extensively about. Honestly, they probably didn't need to be interviewed because if you're interviewing like the cops and the key players, you don't need a couple writers like recapping what was going on.
Right.
But probably if you read their book,
right,
it would probably be.
This would be a good book.
Yeah.
And I think that they were probably there for objectivity in terms of, well, at least maybe the facade of objectivity because they have a book to shill, so they're not exactly purely objective on this. But there wasn't a lot of middle ground offered in this. So it was the Portuguese side of it, and there was the McCann side of it, and there was hardly anything in between. I mean, there was the private investigator who we talked about who was haunted by this. He was a bit of a... But he was working for them, so he wasn't really objective. So yeah, I think they were probably there to provide a little bit of down the middle.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this was an interesting story. The documentary... maybe not so much. Drone footage overload. So
maybe in 8 years, when it's the 15th anniversary of her disappearance, like they did go into like all the people who have been found. So
yeah, that was interesting.
The McCanns still have hope because you have Elizabeth Smart, who was found after 1.5 years or 2 years, and you have J.C. Dugard, who was found after like 10 or 20 years, and all these kids who you assume the worst. And then they show back up. Like I remember when Elizabeth Smart was found, I walked into work at the place we used to work together 20 years ago. And my boss, who wore the Hawaiian shirts, was like, "Hey, did you hear they found Elizabeth Smart?" And I was like, "Oh, did they find her body? Because you assume she's been gone 2 years. Like that's what you assume." And he was like, "No, she was alive." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
So it did talk a lot about like the search for missing children and how many of them are found alive.
And that to me was the fascinating part of this was the fact that there's this organization that looks after kids' rights and stuff like that in these kinds of situations, these kind of tragic situations. And the one guy saying there are a lot of kids that are found. That it's not all tragic circumstances. They're in disappearing kids' cases. A lot of them are found and they're healthy and there's psychological damage done, obviously.
Yeah.
But they're, for the most part, physically okay. And that to me was interesting. I wonder if that part of it was like, let's try to get an optimistic end to this. Let's try to tilt it a little bit.
Yeah,
because it was a bit of a downer all the way. This poor kid was 4 years old when she disappeared. And
right, like I said to you before we started recording, like how, what was I going to say?
How awesome I am.
Yes, that's exactly it.
At this job.
Yes, like how does somebody, even in 2007, which is not today, but even in 2007, how does somebody go missing off the face of the earth?
Right.
And you just have no idea what happened.
Right.
Like there are so many different avenues of inquiry. Like they talk about all the leads they had about like some random lady in Barcelona at 3 a.m. walking up to 2 like Australian guys saying, "Do you have my new daughter?" Like so many random avenues of inquiry, and yet nothing has turned up anywhere. And it's been 12 years. Like how does that happen in this day and age?
And that you raised an interesting point too about this, is that it's also a study about the fallibility of the human memory and recalling details. And so there's a huge part of it dedicated to one of the parties saw a man carrying a kid away in not a paternal way, but sort of like carrying the kid in his arms, like he was carrying a sack of potatoes or something like that. And the kid had PJs on and they described it, but they couldn't focus on the kid, on the person's face.
Yeah.
And it was the fallibility of like this person. So everything you see in your life, can you imagine having to recount, bit by bit, 15 minutes ago what happened and what the guy who came to steam clean the rugs was wearing and what his name was and whether he had an earring or whether he had a hat on or how tall he was or what the license plate of the truck was that he was in, like all these details that that was the fascinating part to me, is like, what happens if this happened, like when a crime is committed? How reliable is your memory? How reliable are the things that you have in your memory that you think are correct? Mm-hmm. So that was stunning. So I think we're going to wrap this episode up.
All right.
Of the disappearance of Madeline McCann.
Okay, your quick take. What do you think happened?
Oh, what do I think happened?
Yeah.
Oh.
We are not wrapping up this episode.
Apparently not. My quick take is I think she was kidnapped and swept away. I don't think she was, as there was speculation in the story, I don't think her parents killed her and dumped her body, accidentally killed her and dumped her body, or that kind of thing. I just think that having seen so much footage of them, the mother is destroyed. You can tell she is. The dad, I'm not 100% sure about, but they're very English, very British. Not English. They're very British, so they're very
stiff upper lip.
And
they were apparently told by media experts, do not break down on camera, because whoever did take your child, they will love that reaction.
That will be victory to them.
Yeah, like keep it together.
I can't imagine. What's your quick take? You're going to say the opposite of what I said.
Yeah.
You think that the parents accidentally killed Madeline?
I don't know.
You don't think they're purely innocent?
I think that when women and children are hurt or killed, the people closest to them usually tend to be the ones to do it.
That's absolutely true.
So that's all I'm going to say about that.
That's absolutely true.
Maybe we should cut this part out. I don't want to get sued.
Disappearing kids, however, I don't know. Well, it's speculation. We don't have any proof, and it's not libelous, so I think we're good.
We're still going to cut this part out. So, wrapping up this episode, Coco's gonna put some groovy music behind this. Yeah.
We're gonna dance.
Dalts
we're not gonna be celebrating actually, because it's kind of a dour topic. But
yeah, Dalts is doing the white man's over, buddy.
And so for another episode of Coco and Dalts, I'm not Coco,
and I'm not Dalts.